Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this hot one episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Arman Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. And folks, this is the first time I've ever called an episode a hot one. And we've had many amazing guests, but this one in particular was really, really good. His name is Johnny Larson. He is an AE over at Talkdesk. He has made President's Club 3 times, multiple time top 3 North America producer for Talkdesk. And this guy can get tactical. Nick, why should people listen?
So Johnny runs an extremely complex technical sale where he has to rely on SEs throughout the sales process. And he has to know all of the technical stuff cold early in the process. And he gets into everything from understanding when a prospect tells him, hey, we want to modernize our tech stack, how to pull on that discovery to get real problems. He gets into how you win very, very fierce competitive deals that often come down to price and some of the best practice things that he does. This was a very, very good episode. Johnny is someone we are absolutely going to have back.
And 3, 2, 1, let's roll.
All right, Johnny, welcome to the show. We start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways. So let's get your 3.
All right, so number 1, we're going to be starting off with the hard question. As you've gone through discovery, technical discovery, demonstrations, scoping calls, architecture deep dives, maybe you've done some preliminary pricing with the buying team. At some point in time, we want to be able to identify from the buyers, whether they're looking at other vendors or not, is there anything that is currently disqualifying them from moving forward with you and the platform of which you are looking to sell them? I want to get in front of that buying team or the influencers, what have you, and I want to ask them, based on what you've seen up until this point, we just want to ensure that we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's, not just from an architecture and product standpoint, but perhaps from a pricing and budgetary standpoint as well. Based on those 2 factors, is there anything as it stands up until today that could potentially disqualify Talkdesk or disqualify your organization from moving forward with us to a next step? And sit back, let the pause sink in, and then let the natural conversation come about.
Amazing. What's number 2?
So number 2 would be timeline. And Armand and I were talking about before, identifying timelines. And I'm not just talking about identifying timelines so that way you can tell your frontline sales manager and revenue operations what your next step in Salesforce is. So that way you can create a clear, actionable, mutual success plan between your organization and the buying team. If we identify that their current vendor is up for contract in February, our turnover and change management target is probably going to be at least a month before that. Having said that, we want to take into account testing, enablement, training, deployment, what kind of integration partners or middleware partners do we need to bring in, discovery, what have you, and then be able to work that timeline backwards so you can clearly articulate to the buying team, if this is in fact the goal, this is what we need to accomplish, and here's the timeline of which we need to accomplish these various milestones.
Route us out, Johnny. What's number 3?
Last one, subject matter expert. I can't speak for all SaaS products, but when you're selling the contact center space, I am a firm believer to bring your subject matter experts internally early and often. 1, because you want to instill a great deal of confidence in the buying team that you're speaking to, that you know exactly what you're doing and you're an expert in this field. The second thing is that you want to make sure you're delivering actionable items and resonating once you get onto that demonstration. The last thing you want to do is just show a generic harbor tour walkthrough. If that's the case, I can go on our Talkdesk YouTube channel and just send you a 3-minute high-level elevator pitch with some cool graphics. But if I'm going to demo the product, I want to know what kind of integrations are we talking about, what kind of network, what kind of telephony we're using, what their workflow looks like, what language do they speak, and I want all of that to matter and resonate. And so I believe that bringing subject matter experts onto the call early and often is going to help you achieve that.
Johnny, let's start with walking back timeline. Usually the 2 pieces of walking back timeline are, number 1, you need a compelling event, and then number 2, you need to walk back all of the things that happen leading up to the compelling event. That first piece is actually oftentimes the hardest. Finding the compelling event in the first place. How do you go about finding a compelling event? Or do you have some examples of compelling events that you'll look for when you're at Talkdesk?
Certainly. So a lot of times, as you can imagine, your job is to find a compelling event when maybe there isn't one. And that's really where the art of the sales professional comes into play. But In my particular industry, a lot of times what you'll find is you're signing 2, 3, 4, 5-year contracts with these contact center providers and these VoIP providers. If we can identify when that product or when that vendor relationship, when that contract is in fact end of life, you typically want to work that back several weeks, because the last thing you want to do is take that contract all the way until the end, until the wheels fall off, and then switch over and go through change management at the very last minute. You're setting your organization up for failure. So I think identifying when that current contract with that provider is up and then working backwards and articulating a real business case as to why you want to start that change management process, the sooner the better.
Johnny, I'm actually curious about how you run intro calls with deals, particularly when they come inbound, because I have to imagine one of the things that you experience is you'll meet with a senior tech executive at an org who says, hey, we're looking to change our VoIP system. We just need something that's more modern. Our contract's expiring in 7 months and we're taking a look at some other options. Is the fact that they want to change and they want something more modern the only thing that you'll use to sell? Are there other things that you'll look for to understand, like problems they're dealing with? Talk to me about how you run those calls to uncover how you're actually going to end up selling the deal other than they have an expiration.
Sure. For example, you had just touched on, we just want something that's more modern, right? That's fantastic. We're on board with that, right? Why do you want something more modern? What is it about your current state that is driving you to the conclusion that perhaps we need to look at the market and see what modern technology exists? What's driving that business case? Let's peel back that onion. And Nick, something that I always do, and I learned this from back when I was an SDR at Mimeo.com, was when I get on a call with a prospect, I don't care if it's a CIO of a large bank or the president or CEO of a small healthcare tech startup in downtown Brooklyn. I always start off by allowing them to introduce themselves, their role, their level of responsibilities. And then I simply ask them, I got my pen and paper right here. Today's call is about you. Why are we here today? And I let them talk. I want to identify why we are speaking today. Why did you come inbound to Talkdesk? Why did you request to talk to sales? You want to modernize your contact center infrastructure. Great, I think you came to the right place, but explain to me why. And then once they start unpacking the why, then you can add on to that compelling event, if you will. For example, if I'm selling into a healthcare tech company and they work with insurance, we know that open enrollment season is August, September, October. Other organizations stretch into November to December. If that's their peak season, then right off the bat, we know that they don't want to be changing anything out during their peak season. They need all hands on deck and they need things rocking and rolling. That is not the time to start messing with integrations and changing their infrastructure. So we can automatically assume that the timelines would be pre or post open enrollment season. If I'm working with a small retail organization in New York City, or a large one for that matter, we know that as soon as Halloween is over, in this country, retail with the holiday season starts well before Thanksgiving. If that's the time which brick and mortar locations get more foot traffic, people are purchasing more products on e-com, people are getting ready for their respective holidays, that is not the time where they want to change out their infrastructure, because that's their peak season, that's their busy season. So we need to articulate these conversations to set the expectation that we're going to go live previous to or post. And I can use that information and that industry-based information without knowing when their current contract is up. If I don't necessarily have a compelling event, but if I can understand the nature of their industry and the peaks and valleys of their busy seasons, I can also double on that as well.
This is key because oftentimes you won't have a clean rip and replace. So for example, at Pave, every once in a while we would have someone whose compensation software was expiring and they hated it, but usually that was not the case. So then the next best thing was, when is their next merit cycle? But if that was 6 months away, the next best thing was, when is their next quarterly batch of new hires or their quarterly batch of option grants? And so you sort of want to have this timeline stack of, your best case is you have a contract expiring, your second best is the merit cycle, your third best is a batch of new employees, and you want multiple shots on goal. So you gave us two so far. The first that you gave us was end of life of a contract. The second was sort of like seasonality in their business. You're trying to avoid the big switchover in the middle of a peak. Are there any other big timeline drivers that you can look for early in your discovery process?
Something that's, I don't want to say it's unique to Talkdesk, but it is certainly part of our selling strategy, is we actually have an entire value consulting team made up of data analytics professionals. So while maybe you can't articulate or identify a tangible, compelling event, right, whether based on seasonality or end of a contract, we actually are able to, after you execute NDAs, of course, obtain some of their metrics, right? So for example, in my space, I can identify average handle time, CSAT scores, call volumes, call durations, missed call opportunities, abandonment rates, and so forth. And what I can do is I can take those numbers and I can bring them to our value consulting team and the data analytics experts, and I can actually put together a PDF that they can bring to their executive C-suite and their buying team that actually shows them the cost of moving to Talkdesk versus the cost of doing nothing. So instead of just the qualitative approach towards selling of look how shiny my bells and whistles at Talkdesk are, here's the quantitative approach towards a relationship with Talkdesk. And we can actually show them numbers while you don't have a compelling event, you don't have the end of a contract. Based on what you're telling me your metrics and volumes are today, if you were to move forward with Talkdesk, here's your ROI. If you were to stay on what you're doing today, here's your ROI. Compare those numbers, it's a no-brainer. So again, I don't know if that's unique to Talkdesk in the way we sell, but it's also something else that can help drive a sense of urgency when maybe there isn't a sense of urgency in place at the moment.
So on that first meeting that you'll have with an exec, what are you doing in that first 30-minute meeting to get them to commit to all of the things that they need to do in the journey of the sales process?
I always start off my qualification and discovery calls with why are we here? And I let them speak. And I'm actually pretty blunt about it. I literally deliver it like that. I say, why are we here today? Most of the time I get a laugh and they start going on. Other times they have a confused look on their face. But nonetheless, I support the New York territory. So I think they appreciate how straightforward and blunt I am. But with that being said, I want to identify what business challenges associated with the contact center specifically are you trying to ameliorate for? Once we unpack that from a high level, what kind of integrations are we talking about? So that way I can start to piece together, okay, if they need integrations with Salesforce and they need a bi-directional push of data between this and that, we have out of the box. So do I necessarily need a subject matter expert here for integrations? No, I don't. If they have a homegrown system and they're not even sure if that homegrown system is built on RESTful APIs, then maybe I need to get an integration specialist onto this call. At some point towards the tail end of the call, I want to identify Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, and sometimes it's a CIO, and sometimes it's a project manager that just graduated from undergrad a couple years ago, and I get everything in between. I want to know what that buying committee is made up of. And oftentimes, and I know a lot of sales reps don't flex on their losses, but I've lost a pretty large deal recently that I hate to admit, and part of the reason why I lost it is because I made the assumption that the COO and co-founder and the VP of IT that were on that call that I wowed and I built a relationship with and they liked what they saw, I assumed that they were the only decision makers, and that's where I fell flat. Little did I know their board was involved. And had I known that, maybe I would have gotten them involved and maybe I would have done a little bit more as it pertains to adjusting my preliminary pricing that I shared, because it became a price play, right? And so most of the contact center vendors in our space, we're not quite apples to apples with pricing, but we're pretty damn near close. But understanding, A, that the board was involved with the yay or nay on this, not the two individuals I thought they were. And then number two, understanding that the competitor I lost to, it was their end of quarter, not our end of quarter. So they were able to cut me off at the kneecaps with pricing. So I think that's another thing that I learned is who are my main competitors and what do their fiscal years look like? Because if I'm trying to close a deal in September and I'm competing with another vendor in my space that is a direct competitor, and I know September is their end of quarter and it's September 22nd and I'm on a pricing review call, I know that that other vendor, because it's their end of Q3, they're going to cut me off at the kneecaps with pricing. So there's a couple of different things that I want to unpack early on in that call. But the main reason why is, why are we here today? What kind of business problems are we looking to ameliorate? What kind of integrations do we need? Are there any kind of special asks or roadmapped elements that maybe they're not out of the box today, but they're roadmapped items for us for maybe Q4, Q1 of next year. And then a little bit about how their buying process works, right? And again, I'm never going to make an assumption again that because I'm speaking to a co-founder and a VP of IT, that that's the bottom line, because clearly I lost a pretty substantial deal in Q2 because I made that assumption.
So Johnny, let's dig in on this competitive pricing situation. This actually reminds me of, if you've ever watched the show Shark Tank, one of the things that Mark Cuban will do is he'll let all the sharks fight each other, and then about halfway through the person's pitch, he'll make them an offer, and it's an offer that sounds really, really sweet, and he'll say, but you have to decide right now. I don't want you to shop this around to anyone else. And then all the other sharks will lose the deal because they want to jump on the offer with Mark Cuban. And this will sometimes happen in competitive deals, where at Pave, I was selling a premium solution, and sometimes a lowball competitor would come in, and they would try to steal the deal quick at 15K, and I wouldn't even get the chance to negotiate because I didn't realize that they were going to completely drop their pants like that. And so when it's the competitor's end of quarter, how do you make sure that you don't lose the deal on price without just volunteering a proactive discount?
The one thing, and I started taking this approach recently, so this is not something that I've adopted ever since I started Talkdesk. I'll be honest about that as well, is a lot of the times when you start throwing out, let's call it free professional services and implementation costs, if you cut the license cost in half, if you start offering several free months of credit, in our space, typically when you see free, that's going to equate to the level of support and service you get once you're post-sale with that organization. So I've found many a times I'd be in a deal cycle where our professional services and implementation costs are quite expensive. As you can imagine, you've heard some of the granular level items that we discussed on a discovery call. A commercial deal for us could take several months to close, never mind just an enterprise deal. And so a lot of the times I'll remind these buying teams that while it might be the competitor's end of quarter and they might be trying to squeeze this deal in, just remember and keep in the back of your mind, what happens after you sign that DocuSign? What happens when you go into the implementation queue? What happens when you need to kick off this project and you would like for this said vendor to put an all hands on deck approach and give you that white glove customer support that they pitched on their shiny slide deck during your demonstration? Do you think for one solitary second that that's going to still be honored? Being that this is the end of quarter, they're slashing all their prices and they're giving away tens of thousands of dollars of software sales and services for free? I would take a step back and just think about that for a second. How nuanced and how complex is your infrastructure and your landscape today? How important is the post-sale service and support to you and your team, right? If you don't have an entire battalion behind you of DevOps and engineers, I would strongly take a step back and ask yourself what that free means. And then from there, there's a whole bunch of other strategies I might use. I might ask them to share the pricing with me to see if we can get closer to apples. I might just proactively go back to our finance team and say, hey, I know this competitor. I know what they're doing. It's their end of quarter. This is where they're at. How can we work this down a little bit and maybe sweeten the deal by putting some front-loaded credits during implementation into the process, right? So there's a multitude of things that I would want to identify, but a lot of times when I hear the competitor is offering free this, free that, free months, slashing things in half, I always want to remind that buying team, especially the bigger the project and the more dollar signs on that order form, what does free usually mean? And so usually that gets them thinking.
Do you deliver that message the same way that you just delivered it here on the podcast? Because I heard some intensity and energy behind it. And maybe it's because you sell into New York, you're able to do that. But I'm wondering, is that how you deliver the message? And if not, do you deliver it a different way?
I certainly deliver it very close to that. It's pretty ballpark given that I cover the New York territory here. There's times where I'm very professional and very buttoned up, and I don't attack buying teams. I don't attack buyers, right? I want them to trust me. I want to build a relationship with them. But most of the time when you're dealing with mid-market, lower enterprise buying teams, you need to put your foot down and you need to be very clear about your expectations. The more you pull back and the more you don't communicate things like that, the chances are that your competitor is going to steal that deal away from you is pretty high.
Knowing that you've sold in both types of territories, for folks that sell into maybe the Midwest or South where you were selling before, how would you recommend those folks adapt or edit the way that they communicate, their manner of speaking, cultural stuff, etc.
Yeah, definitely tone it down with the volume, the bass, the animation, if you will. I noticed that when I supported that territory, not only as an account executive, but an SDR manager as well, I always want to take a consultative approach, right? We all say we want to be consultants and not salespeople. I'm a salesperson. I'm a sales professional and I support the New York territory, and that's just the way it is. But I found that in those other territories that are not New York, that are not Boston, that are not Philadelphia, taking a much, I don't want to say passive, but a little bit of a dialed back approach, more of a consultative tone, a little bit more of a hospitable approach, if you will, and the degree of professional persistence, always following up, always checking in, texting, calling, voicemails, LinkedIn messages, ease up on the aggressiveness with that as well. Understand that not all buyers operate the same way they do in large Northeast cities. Adapt your tonality, adapt your level of professional persistence, and try to be a little bit more hospitable and consultative in your approach when dealing with those Midwest territories, those SEC territories, if you will, versus if you deal with Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia, let's say.
So you do this initial New York check with your New York prospects, and you're like, look, what are you actually paying for? What is the cost of free and all that stuff? But then eventually you need to go back to your team and come back with some sort of recommended solution or recommended proposal. Talk to me, how do you go from that initial confrontation to coming back with solutions or a new proposal that works for your prospect?
When it comes to the way we do business here at Talkdesk, nobody's just going to acquiesce to me saying, hey guys, a competitor just cut me off the kneecaps and sweetened the deal. I need to match it or beat it. Let's go. Approve it in Salesforce for me. There needs to be a business case as to why. And I need to demonstrate to our finance team, our sales operations team, and our senior level sales leadership that I understand this project, I understand this buyer, I understand the projected growth based on the industry they're in, based on the funding they just received, based on where they stand in the market. If I'm selling into a credit union and this credit union has several $1 billion in assets, and they're one of the biggest credit unions in the East Coast, and they're acquiring small banks left and right, chances are that's going to be an organization that we want to do business with. So if I can articulate the why in the business case and the future growth map, more often than not, finance will allow me to make an adjustment. If it's a small 5 to 10 seater, somebody who's coming in to our live chat, talk to sales, and their CFO told to get 3 quotes, and they're just looking for Toyota Camry pricing, but they want that clean BMW 5 Series, that's not going to work for my finance team. And I've learned over time being in this role that I'm really not willing to entertain that either. I used to these small 5 to 10 seats. I used to want to get it down and cut it down and beat the competition with pricing and win no matter what at all expenses. But I've learned what's best for our business, what's best for our organization, and which opportunities to let go of and which ones to focus on. Right?
Yeah, so you're not going to push on and chase every 10-seater heater you can find. But let's say that you've got a deal and it's a meaningful 6-figure deal and it's a deal you want to close and you think it's a good one for the organization. How do you know what to come back to your prospects with?
When I find myself in a position where we're talking about a big 6-figure deal and we've understood that the competition might have sweetened the deal, it was articulated to us, whether it be from the buying team or the partner, what do? I take that information back not only to our channel leadership, but our finance team, our sales operations team, our senior level sales leadership. I create the business case and I say, hey, we might not be able to go apples to apples or oranges to oranges here, but what can we do to show that we're willing to put our best foot forward here? I'll put that proposal together and then I'll either reach out to my channel partner that I'm working on the deal with that's guarding the customer, or I want to identify who is my quarterback on that team. Who not only is the quarterback, who's the person I've connected with the most on that opportunity, that trusts me the most, that I trust the most. And I'm probably going to, in a non-email way, I might give them a quick cell phone call. Not calling through a Talkdesk line, calling through my personal cell phone line. Or I might drop a quick subtle hint on a quick LinkedIn message, right? I'm not going to formally put out an email because more often than not, I found that just blindly sending out PDFs and proposals in templated DocuSign folders, chances are the likelihood of which people are going to respond to that is pretty slim. So I want to get somebody associated with this deal that's through the channel partner they're using, or on that buying team that I have a relationship with, I've built trust with, and in a very kind of low-key, non-aggressive way, briefly create a touch point, not telling them why. Hey, you got 10 minutes to chat Thursday at 3:30. I just want to debrief on that last pricing call we had on Monday. Sure, no problem. I'll send them a placeholder and I'll call them from my cell phone. And without getting too in detail prior to, I'll spill the beans there and ask for the next step. That's the approach that I would take. I wouldn't go straight to the buyer or the buying team, everybody on CC, sending off a PDF. I feel like that's a little bit of a desperation move, but I want to be able to connect with somebody associated with that buying team or the partner and pretty much say, hey, I want to put my best foot forward here. I took the information from the pricing call on Monday and what the competition is showing. This is what we can do to put our best foot forward here. And then I'll articulate from there, get their feedback, and then work towards positioning that next step before I get off the phone.
I want to make sure we hit this nail on the head. I know you gave the example of, okay, if you find that you got cut off at the knees by a competitor, you need to go around and do all these back channels and all that stuff. But let's say the prospect is giving you the chance to come back and you're still in the deal. What are you getting or what are you asking from the prospect to understand what gets the deal done from their side?
So Armand, perfect example. Remember the deal we just talked about where I assumed the co-founder and the VP of IT were my decision makers? And it was really the board, and that's why I didn't invest enough to win that deal? I didn't say, hey, how many free licenses or how many free months or where does professional services need to come out to, or do we need to change from annual billing to quarterly billing to sweeten the deal? I literally asked them, where do we need to be? This is your incumbent. This is who else you're looking for. Where do I need to be in a position where you, your CFO, your board, and your entire team are willing to move forward with Talkdesk? And I got the exact number all in from an MRR perspective. Once I got that number on a recorded line, I was able to take that back to my finance team, and I not only was able to match that number, but I was able to beat it based on manipulating some of the objects on the order form. So not only could we get more competitive, but myself and my frontline sales leader wouldn't miss out on the ACV and the bookable quota as well. I got down to the very number per agent, per license, all in, to include AI, to include add-ons, to include the cost of the license. Once I break these numbers down, this is what it would be per agent MRR per month. I got that number, and I still lost the deal.
What was your strategy in beating the number, and how did you articulate that to the prospect? Because it sounds like you had a conversation where they said, hey, if you come in at 100, you get the deal. But you decided you were going to do even better. What was your strategy, and how did you articulate that to the prospect?
So I wanted to identify what was most important for their day one go live. Not the nice to haves that we put on the proposal. What is it that they need to be successful on day one? And remove the fluff, remove the shiny objects that are cool, and we want that, but we don't necessarily need that to be live on day one to be successful as a business. So what I did was I was able to identify what do they need to have versus what was nice to have, and adjust that telco usage just a little bit so we could get them where they need to be. And while we found that we were successful in that endeavor and they appreciated it, it was well received. It got to a point, unfortunately, where the investors and the board came in over the top and pretty much shut the conversation down, regardless of what the VP of IT and the co-founder said. And again, it reverts back to me understanding on that first discovery call, is it just you two gentlemen making this decision, or are there other players involved? And there's other players involved. That next step demo, I'm not just asking those two gentlemen, I want members of that board to come. And if members of that board came and I knew what to deliver on, perhaps it could have changed the outcome of the sales motion, but we all revert back to sales motions and opportunities and projects that we wish shoulda, coulda, woulda, but learning opportunity nonetheless.
100%. Johnny, I could ask you 10,000 calls worth of questions, but we are running out of time. Got to move to the final one. Final question is this. We've talked about a lot of really great things salespeople should be doing. Now I got to ask you about a shouldn't. And so the last question is, what is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
A lot of account executives, and if you're listening to this, you know who you are very oh so lazy. They don't allocate time to the SDR-AE relationship. They might catch up on a Monday sync. They talk about the golf trip or the fish outing that they went on. They're a little banged up from too many beers at the college football game on Saturday. You got anything for me? No demo requests? No meetings booked? All right, SDR, we'll see you later. That's number one. Number two, very, very lazy approach. I see all these old school accounting executives. I've been in the game for 25, 30 years, and they download Yesware. They take every single leading contact in that CRM and dump them into Yesware, and they're pounding 2,000 to 3,000 contacts worth of emails a day, not realizing that not only are you potentially getting your organization's domain blocked, but what you're doing is you are spamming the organization and decreasing the likelihood that they're actually want to go to entertain a conversation with you if and when their project might be coming up for RFP.
Amazing. Johnny, thank you for joining us. Killer episode. Everybody stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon.
Alrighty, Nick, it is time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Johnny Larson from Talkdesk. What do you have for your 2?
So my first is you should know when your major competitors' fiscal periods end and look for the breadcrumbs they might be dropping that you can use to understand, hey, are they going to drop their pants and really make this a price battle? Number 2 is if you are competing on price, which is a reality of sales, what you might consider doing if this customer really cares about getting the cheapest thing in the door early is skinny down your proposal to just the must-haves and propose a phased approach to your prospect where we say, hey, we're going to get you in for the stuff you need on day one, but then we can always expand and it's going to be better for you because you're not going to be overwhelmed implementing a million different things on day one, and it will make your quote look smaller than your competitors.
Number 3, build your own timeline stack. In other words, figure out what are the key drivers of timeline in order of how well they drive timeline. So Johnny's were, number 1, if they're ending their contract with another vendor. Number 2, if there's seasonality in their industry. So for example, they probably don't want to move infrastructure in the middle of retail busy season during the holidays. And number 3 was the cost of doing nothing versus the cost of moving to Talkdesk. And then lastly, number 4, whenever you jump on a discovery call, if you hear someone say, we're really interested in modernizing our tech stack, that is a want, and you need to turn the want into a why. So if you want to modernize your tech stack, why do you want to do it? That is what is going to show you the business driver, the business problem, and the timeline driver. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
Armand, one of the newsletter editions that you put out that I lean on more than anything is the How to Drive Timeline in Sales. You talk about the 4 different timeline levers, and I found it helpful because what you did is you took the ways to drive timeline, and you didn't say, here's the 47 things you can do. You actually gave the types of timeline drivers. And I've used it at 30MPC to help get deals to close. Folks, it's free. There's a link to it in the newsletter in the show notes. Go check it out. It will help you close your deals on your timeline, not some arbitrary customer, maybe one day timeline. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on the show.